Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Soul Call with Kelly B. I'm your host, Kelly Butchert, and it's my absolute honour and privilege, as always, to bring you the most incredible guest in conversation with me today. Carol, you are joining me from Australia, but as soon as you hear Carol introduce herself, you'll hear that there is not an Australian accent there. So, Carol, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about where you are and where you're from.
Okay. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I currently live in Melbourne, Australia, but as you can tell, I was born in London, the East End of London. And if you think my accent sounds strong now, you should have heard me before I moved.
Oh, it's so wonderful to have you here in conversation with me, Carol. I These are some of the most favourite things that I do. I have these incredible conversations with people that just open up my heart and open up my mind. Now, I'll maybe just start by sharing that you have come into my life just in recent months. And we talk every day, every other day online, but we also meet regularly. We meet weekly with another two beautiful souls, and we do lots of magical work together. So I want to give a shout out to Emily for introducing me to you. And I've had Emily on the podcast previously. I call her my Essex twin, and I'm her Scottish twin. So I just want to give a big loving thanks to Emily for introducing me to you because you are so magical. And I know that you probably wouldn't describe yourself this way, Carol, but what you do and how you show up in service is truly miraculous and magical. And we're going to hear more about the incredible work that you do. But I say this to you all the time, there are so many layers to you. And even before we press record today, you'd sent me over a copy of your bio. And I'm learning more and more and more about you all the time. And the journey that you have had to now get to this point has been, in and of itself, filled with magic and miracles. But we'll get to all of that. There has been so much that I've learned about you that's just fascinating. And this is one of the reasons that I started this podcast because I'm so fascinated about people's lives, about the psychology, about what women especially have had to overcome in order to get to where they've got to and to show up in loving service on this planet. So I just want to first of all start with that I really see you. And I think that there's so much still that I obviously do not know about you, Carol, that's just, and I'm sure there's going to be things that you touch on today that I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know that about you either. So let's just start from where you are now. How does Carol show up in service in the world today?
Okay. What I'm currently doing is working with women that need help with releasing, or at least coming to terms with trauma in their lives, abuse and trauma. Kind of always done that, really. It's just now that I have a more effective way of doing that, and it's taken me very many years to get to the bottom of what needed to happen for women. And it turns out the key is, as ever, the womb.
Amazing.
Um, and I'm totally in awe of the power of a woman's womb, what it can actually do for her, heal her from the inside out, and what it actually connects us to. It just seems like women have therefore, an innate connection to cosmic womb that men don't have quite the same way. And I believe that's why it's always been the woman that initiates a man with tantra, sexual practices, and all that kind of stuff, because we're holding the energy pattern that the men actually need. And so when you look back in history and look at things like the men always being taken to monasteries, whether that's Tibetan or European. Always seem to be the men taken into these secluded places to do these higher level practices, apparently, and the women weren't always admitted or very rarely. And I think you can easily look at that in terms of patriarchy, but actually, I think what was really going on, certainly when these practices started, was an acknowledgement that women already knew how to do this. It's their natural state of being, but the men needed to be trained just so they could get to the point where they could meet a woman properly, energetically and sexually if they desired. So I think there's so much that we are, now that we're swinging back towards the goddess in our hearts and in our minds and in our energies, I think we can really start to heal a lot of our perceptions of what's actually gone on in history. I think we're going to be able to perceive, to understand our own history much more thoroughly now, which is very, very empowering, especially for women.
Mhm. And this is typical of you, Carol. You've gone straight in with what I would call a teaching point. I think it's like, I'm already like, oh, yeah. When you mentioned this before in a previous conversation, I went straight to that place of, wow, I've never thought of that before in that way. That um, these mystical men would go away, as you've described, to monasteries. But, well, what about the women? What was actually going on there? And this is so typical of you from how I perceive you, Carol, that you look at things with such depth and really, as I said at the start, when I framed this conversation up, really opening our minds and opening our hearts to the deeper truths of what has been going on for a very, very, very long time. So I'm really, wow, I'm just blown away that you've opened up with that. So obviously, you wouldn't have always, I'm assuming, wouldn't have always known that. So what has been the journey for you to explore the truths of the magic that women hold and the magic of the womb? What, and I know that that'll probably take several layers to open that whole conversation up. But what has led you to know this, to truly know this?
Well, because I needed to heal the feminine, I needed to heal the mother. I chose a very difficult lifetime for myself on a soul level, and I had an experience of a very dark mother archetype that did me a lot of damage. And so I very quickly had to start working things out for myself and asking questions about human sexuality, and metaphysics much earlier on in life than I would have done if I'd just had a nice, easy, plain sailing, sponge cake and ice cream kind of a childhood. So, and that's what I think, I'm sure lots of people come to a conclusion of when they have suffered and walked a lot of depression and dark nights of the soul, is that eventually you realize that there is no way you would have taken on the levels of healing and self-discovery that you did had you not chosen to take on those wounds. It's a way to kick ourselves up the arse and make sure we get some healing done in this lifetime. We take on a tricky one, right? As long as that doesn't kill us in the process.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of people watching and listening to this episode will totally relate because I truly believe, certainly on many of the clients that I have been so privileged to work with, and even when I worked in education, seeing the level of trauma that people are experiencing is like lifetimes, what I would consider to be lifetimes of trauma and challenges and adversities that they're experiencing. And you think, why? What is the purpose and what is the reason behind that? And I guess we can all dip into victimhood at time and feel really sorry for ourselves and think, shit, what is this life about? Why am I experiencing this? And I know that there were a lot of questions I asked when I saw a lot of children suffering. And I used to think that I wanted to ease suffering in the world and wanted to rescue children. But of course, there is a divine orchestration at play. There is a bigger plan at play. And when we start to understand that, when we start to connect back to the truth of who we are, and that actually, I certainly believe that as a soul, we have had a say. Maybe not, maybe we wouldn't have signed up for the conditions and the experiences, but we have had at some level, a soul level, a say in the karma that we would come back to, maybe rebalance the books, if you like, or have certain experiences so that we could evolve beyond the pain and the suffering. But you
Yeah.
mentioned Dark Nights of the Soul, and I know that many viewers and listeners will have heard of that expression, but some won't have. So let's just unpick that a little bit further, Carol. What do you personally mean by Dark Nights of the Soul, and how has that maybe even shown up in your life?
For me, when I referring to that, I mean rock bottom. I mean absolutely utter depression and just so wounded that you're unable to function.
Mhm,
The I believe that traditional cultures, certainly in Native America, they would call that ashes work.
mhm,
So if somebody was getting into that state, they would just lie them down by the fire. They would lie in all the embers and the ashes by the edge of the fire, and the whole tribe would look after them while they were taking that descent into the underworld. Because the tribe understood that if they were doing that descent, they were doing that for the whole tribe, and they honored that level of healing. And it, I can get quite emotional talking about this, but basically, the problem always is that our culture doesn't value anything yin. And this is pure yin. To take the utter descent where you've completely stopped functioning, you can't even, you're just utterly, you ground to a halt, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. You cannot do anymore. You're utterly, utterly wounded. It's complete yin, isn't it? In
mhm,
some respects, it's
mhm,
enforced yin, and our culture doesn't honor it in any way. It doesn't support it. It stigmatizes people that have so-called mental health problems, even though we're now realizing that the gut produces more of those hormones than the brain ever did. So what we've called mental health issues should have been gut health issues, perhaps, which I think would take the stigma away overnight.
yeah.
But yeah, or just or what do we do to people that are depressed and really needing to feel?
Mhm,
We give them drugs so that they can't feel anymore, so that they numb out. Our
mhm,
whole culture is based on not supporting people to actually live.
mhm,
We're just existing, becoming drones, functioning for the man, for the system. We
mhm,
are not able to take the time to actually find ourselves, heal our hearts, reconnect to what's true and real in life. I suppose here I'm talking about matrix busting.
mhm. Yeah, and really honouring that ancient wisdom of the elders, and how I love how you've even reflected that as the yin energy, the divine feminine, where I suppose we're coded to break through the matrix, and we have divine will, whether we choose to suppress that journey and numb ourselves and just stay in survival mode, or we deeply surrender to trust the process that this is going to be effing hard and it's going to be, harder than, anything that you've ever experienced. But that's where the breakthroughs come. That's where we break through into the light, into the magic and the wisdom that we hold, because all the answers are inside of us. And of course, the elders and the magical wisdom that we carry in our DNA, it's all in here. We know this, but it's really challenging and really difficult. And I really, really, I love how you've brought that up, Carol. I love how you've described that as well. I've never heard it described that before in that way. Um, I just think it's so, so beautiful. And I could have like a whole hour's conversation with you about just even that. And this is, by the way, what it's like when you have any conversation with Carol. Everything is so rich. Everything is just so, oh my gosh, let's take an hour just to explore that now, you know? So thank you for presenting it in that way. I know that even just that will have opened up people's minds to really think about their own lives and reflect on moments of crisis when they have literally been at rock bottom. And I know what that feels like from my own personal experience, feeling like there is no way out. And I've mentioned this before in previous episodes. When I worked as a primary school teacher, one of my favourite children's books was We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And in that story, I would get the children to read it out loud with me. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We've got to go through it. You know, and there's never been such a truer representation of the dark night of the soul. We've got to go through it. We've got to feel all the emotions, that energy
Yeah.
and motion, and journey with it, and to
Mm.
be present with it, and to be a witness to yourself. So I know that you are now, you've got so many specialisms, Carol. I mean, oh my goodness, but you've got really, really, really into the energy of the womb, the
Mm.
magic that women hold within the womb, and how that's quite distinctly different from, obviously, not just physiologically from males, but every way energetically. And you have experienced your own journey there with fertility and your own dark nights of the soul with fertility, which has brought you to be even more passionate and more knowledgeable because you've gone to all these places yourself. So being able to truly empathize with clients and students that come to work with you, I would love for you just to unpick that for us a little bit more about that journey, that personal journey for you. Um, Share whatever you're most comfortable to share with Carol.
Okay. Well, because I'd had such a difficult upbringing, I was really terrified of becoming a mother myself. I was really, really worried that in extremis, which I think, for a lot of women, looking after a tiny baby is really hard, right? I was under no illusion about how hard that whole process could be. And what I was worried about was that I would just degenerate into my mother when I was that sleep deprived, when I was that pushed.
Mhm.
And I couldn't bear the thought of becoming her and doing that to another child. So I put it off and put it off, thinking, well, another year, I'll do some more psychotherapy. I'll keep working on myself. Maybe I'll feel ready soon, but I never felt ready. And
Mhm.
so when I actually was diagnosed with a uterine tumor when I was 35, it was suddenly too late because it was the most aggressive tumor type you can have, apparently. And the surgeon wanted to operate within a week. So I had no time to kind of get my head around it or anything. So I actually talked him out of that. He was about to go on holiday, and I said, "Look, actually, because I've been working with my periods, my bleeding for a year or two prior to that, I'd finally taught myself about what it really meant to be a bleeding woman, and I was working with that ceremonially every full moon. And all of a sudden, I realized I was never going to have a period again, and I was never going to have a baby, and it was all just too much. And so I talked him into just waiting till he got back from holiday, and that gave me one last bleed, which at least gave me a chance to ceremonially say goodbye to my bleeding self and try and create a ceremony around the operation that was about to happen because I couldn't get my head around it. I was in a place of I should, because I was still very, I should be able to heal myself. If I'm going to walk my talk and have any authority and validity in the world, I fully believe that the body can heal itself from any condition. And the only block to that was me. And so I felt like I was wimping out on that opportunity to really get to grips with what was really going on and healing myself if I took their operation, never mind the dark side of what having an operation means. But everybody persuaded me that this was not a cancer to mess about with. And so I did do it. So the only way I could make that work for myself spiritually was to turn it into a ceremony. So my partner at the time did a backup ceremony while I was having the surgery. I told him exactly what I wanted him to do and when, and he kind of held the space and anchored that down for me in an attempt to make sure that it wasn't just the physical stuff that was taken away, that we were dealing with the emotional, mental, and spiritual layers at the same time so that the cancer would never return. And so at least I felt we took a holistic approach to the surgery. That's the best I could do. But that did mean that I was pretty much in a crone place at the age of 35, which was pretty harsh. And having never really been through the mother bit either. So it's just very harsh. So when I was 50, I took myself off to do a vision quest, 4 days and nights, just water in a beautiful oak forest in Devon, England, because I felt like I needed a rite of passage. Like I'd missed a few of the normal passages that women go through, and I needed to gift myself that. So that's what I did, vision quest, and that really, really helped me step into that crone place and embrace it.
And again, oh my goodness, there is so much richness there that we could unpick, Carol. I think sometimes we can look at ourselves and assume that everybody lives their life in a certain way. And there's things that, yeah, I know that my audience will be familiar with, but I'm being mindful that there'll be people watching and listening going, what did she just say there? Oh my goodness, pause a minute. Let's just rewind. But oh my goodness, there is so much that you have shared there that is just, again, could lead to our conversations. You just drop in, how ceremoniously you were working with your bleeding. So I know that many women listening to this will be familiar and au fait with that, but many won't. What do you actually mean by that, Carol? So there are many women, certainly in my life, that will have no clue what you mean by that. There will be many that do. So when you're talking about you were working ceremoniously with your bleed on a monthly
Mm.
basis, what do you actually mean by that?
Okay, well, my understanding of it is that it's one of our functions as women, that the menstrual blood isn't just there to thicken the lining up in case you want to get pregnant that month. It's also part of our energetic clearing system because we take on more into that sacral chakra than men do, because we don't just have a sacral chakra like they do and absorb stuff through the aura. We have a physical entrance into that chakra through the vagina and cervix into the womb. And so we take on an awful lot. And again, going back to indigenous tribes, they respected women for doing this for the tribe. I believe this is why they were sequestered during the bleed time. It wasn't because the bleed was considered unclean. It was because those women were honoured for what they were doing for the tribe, because they would have absorbed any issues, toxicity, problems that were going on in the family and tribe all month, and then they would bleed that out. So it wasn't just about clearing that toxicity out of their bodies. Is if you consciously bleed in that way, knowing what you're bleeding on, what you've taken into your bleed, what you've taken on through that month, and consciously taken into that bleed to release into the earth, That then allows cosmic womb to start downloading the correct wisdom into her as to what to do about those problems when she comes out of her bleed. So she becomes this highly functioning visionary and leader through the mechanism of her bleed.
Oh my goodness, I've actually got goosebumps. This kind of wisdom is very new to me, Carol. This is the kind of stuff that we do not teach our children anymore. And I quite
Mm,
purposely wove in, my background in education, because I was in education for 22 years. Never were we taught this in schools. Never was I taught this in my family. And so learning this quite recently has brought back like memories for me. Not a lot of memories, but I've unlocked aspects of womanhood and what it means to be a woman very, very recently. And I really, there's a big part of me wishes we could go back and like do it all over again. I wish I could go back and teach my own girls about these, you know, very, very, very sacred um, aspects of our spiritual selves, because this is not, as you say, just about the physical mechanics of the body and we're having a monthly bleed just because we've not used up eggs or just because we're getting rid of toxicity in the body. This goes much, much deeper. And, I've learned over time how separation is an illusion, that we are all not just brothers and sisters, but we're one living, breathing organism ourselves, humanity, that we're all connected. And when you're talking about the tribes and, we're talking about family constellations or give it whatever name, our elders knew the deeper truths of honouring the woman's role within these family
yeah.
constellations, these tribes, and they had real reverence for the important work that was happening on all levels, spiritual, emotionally, mentally, as well as physically. And beyond, you've mentioned the cosmic womb, which I love as well, because one of my oracle cards in honor of that in my oracle deck here, the soul call available on Amazon. I'll do a wee plug there, Carol. One of the cards is the cosmic womb.
Mm,
So there is, oh my goodness, there's so many levels to even just what you've just thrown in that comment there. And,
mm,
it's even just recently that I've learned about in some traditions, they would have red tents where the women would all go together to bleed. Because, I mean, and again, we're so out of sync with the natural rhythms of life. Women would bleed at the same time, all in
yeah.
conjunction. Could you share a little bit more about that and how,
Mm,
rhythmically the importance of why it's important to be in tune with the natural rhythms and
mm.
how sacred these ceremonies were?
Because we are nature, right? That's a simple answer.
Yeah,
That's why it's important to be in sync with nature. We
yeah.
have divorced ourselves from nature, haven't we? The way we live now in
Mhm,
these square boxes that cut us off from the electromagnetic field of Gaia,
mhm,
they hyper insulate us and actually create harmful
mhm,
electromagnetic flows around our bodies. If we want to get in tune with God, where do we go? We go and walk in a forest. We go
mhm,
to the ocean.
mhm,
We need nature. Nature evolves us.
mhm,
Nature's at a far higher level of evolution than we are. We just, in our arrogance, we imagine ourselves to be top of some kind of consciousness chain on this planet. We are not.
mhm.
I believe trees are at least 8 dimension beings. They're way beyond us.
Yeah.
They're here to help us evolve. That's why I went to a forest to do my vision quest.
Wow.
But I feel like I haven't quite answered your question. So, What was the question again?
So the sacred ceremonies that women,
Yes,
and being in
right.
symbiosis with
And the
nature
cycle.
and bleeding at the same time, and there's just the
Yeah.
sacredness of all of that. What have we become? What's the disconnect? I mean, obviously it's nature. We've been removed so far from what is so natural to us. So how do we get back there? What is, and I know that's another aspect to the question. How do we get back there to what the wise ones knew? We're not being taught this in schools. We're not being taught this in all our families. But, what is the importance of it? Why is it relevant?
For all the reasons we've already discussed, there is no real understanding of the cosmology we're living in without this wisdom, I believe. We
Mhm.
actually don't understand our place in the universe if we're not anchored into the planet properly. You have to go down to go up, you have to go in and through. It's every you can guarantee anything we've been taught, you can reverse to find the truth, right? So the light isn't
Absolutely.
up, it's down.
Yeah, yeah,
All that, right?
yeah.
So when it comes to the lunar cycle, um, it does most women do what they're meant to bleed on the dark moon and ovulate on the full.
Well,
If everybody was in sync with the moon, and you can have a lot of discussions about what the moon actually is and who made it. That's a whole rabbit hole. But at this point in our history, we are definitely governed by that moon and its tides, right?
Mhm.
And so if we were in sync, we would definitely be menstruating on the dark moon because that's when the energy is at its lowest. The tides are literally at their lowest ebb. And
Mhm.
that's when the tides in our bodies are at our lowest ebb. Our energy is already low. So it
Mhm.
makes sense to be in that. There's a bit of a clash of energy if you bleed on the full moon because the cosmos is going that's the youngest point of a moon cycle, right? Cosmos is going, yeah, 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 let's party, and your body's going, oh no, let me just bleed, and there's a bit of a mishmash. Now, some women actually need to do that for a while for their own healing. They actually find that their cycle goes there for very specific reasons. And what my job is to try and decode what that means for her. Why has her body done that? Because the full moon is the mother archetype.
Mhm.
So if she's bleeding where she shouldn't be, then my first question is tell me about your relationship with your mother. And then we're usually into it. So what I find amazing about the womb and the cycles is that it always, always is trying to speak to us. She's
Mhm.
always trying to tell us exactly what's going on and what healing she needs. But we haven't been given the language to decode her for so many hundreds, if not thousands of years. But she's definitely our one of our greatest assets and wisdom keepers, I would say.
For sure. Now,
Mm,
again, our audience that are tuning in, they're not going to have these conversations with their doctor when they go for any kind of fertility issues, Carol.
no.
It, I would be absolutely, bowled over if that was the case. I mean, these conversations never happened, certainly on my journey into motherhood. I've been very blessed to be a mother twice over in this lifetime. And like you, although it wasn't cancer, I had a lot of gynecological issues. I had, several things that led to me having a hysterectomy around the same age as yourself. So at 35, 37, I had a full hysterectomy and double oophorectomy. So they took my ovaries as well. So that meant at that age I couldn't have any more. That decision was taken from me. And I didn't have any ceremonies because I didn't know about all of this. I was doing blessings on my womb and thanking it for everything that, she had provided, my two beautiful girls. But that in and of itself is such, whether you were blessed with children or not, is such a massive thing being plunged into menopause overnight. Now, I had had some perimenopausal symptoms prior, so early. So yeah, they certainly were. I'm now doubting whether they were perimenopausal, but we apply these labels, don't we, to understand what's going on with our bodies. So being plunged into menopause, like literally overnight, you spoke about that crone phase and you went off to have this vision quest. I didn't know about vision quests at that point. I mean, as I say, this is all very new to me in this life. I don't doubt for a minute that I will have experienced this in previous lives, but very new to me. So, struggling with even that phase in my life and having said that I wouldn't have HRT to then going on unlicensed levels of HRT for 10 years because my symptoms were so severe and I needed to function. Um, so there were so many layers, having to accept that I was having these bodily parts removed, a traumatic surgery, I nearly died, um, rushing back to work way sooner than I should have ever gone back. I hadn't really given myself that time to heal that I really deserved. So this is where, it's been a very different journey for me. The vision quest that you mentioned, you went off into the forest. And by the way, I totally agree with you about trees being at least eight dimensional. Like, I love the forest, I love the trees, and I call them wisdom keepers and guardians on this planet.
Mm.
We don't hear many women. I can't think of any of my close friends who have gone off and done vision quests. I know women now because I've sought them out and I'm going into this whole earth medicine woman phase of my life where I'm going to be training with Liz Harris, who I had on my podcast recently. She's an amazing soul. And I'm really getting into the shamanic side of things, the earthly side of things, and the cosmic side of things in a much deeper way. But I didn't have that available to me at that time. And as I say, I don't know many women who say, right, I've had a hysterectomy, I'll wait to do a vision quest for 4 days. It's like,
Yeah,
oh my God. Like,
yeah.
you just drop these things into conversation like they're just every day. They're not for me or the women that I know. So can we just hear about why that was important to go and do a vision quest and even explain in your terms what a vision quest is?
Mm.
And what that revealed for you, Carol.
Okay. I did some shamanic training initially. It's probably the first sort of metaphysical training I ever did. So it's always been my bottom line. It's always my go-to. And it's given me a foundation to build on everything else. And I'm so grateful for it because when the New Age movement got pretty much hijacked into a manifestation cult, I was able to see through that really quickly and not get suckered in because I'd had a proper training. I wasn't buying it. So thank God for that. Um,
And
so
there's a
yeah,
whole
it's just,
other hour conversation, Carol, about the New Age movement, but that'll be for
yep.
another day.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story, right? And we don't necessarily want to get you shadow banned on whatever platforms you're putting this up on. So we're not going to go there today. Um, but yeah, that kind of the four directions, which is basically a two-dimensional model of what's obviously a three-dimensional structure. So the circle is really a sphere, and the four dimensions are the only ones you can see in that sphere, but there's really seven dimensions, obviously, because there's the above, below, and within, as well as the side. So that's my understanding of the human energy system and how we become magicians in this reality is getting to know that mechanism, that
Yeah.
light body. And so obviously when I need help, that's my go-to. And I knew the most powerful thing I was aware of as a ceremony was this vision quest. So I did it. And it was the most beautiful thing. It was
So you
you
take
know
your,
those pre-Raphaelite paintings where you see a woman lying in a forest and her hair's all kind of just kind of it's got all flowers in it, and she's almost kind of melting into the grass underneath her.
yeah.
It wasn't as glamorous as that, obviously, but that was kind of how it felt because I was so exhausted by the time I got there, long story short, that I just put my tarp up. All you're allowed is a tarp underneath you and one sort of just to keep the rain off. So then you've got a view out and you've got all the wind in your face, no fire allowed because that's too much of a distraction. So I was lying in my sleeping bag under this tarp and I was so exhausted. It was as if the ground opened up underneath me and just let me sink down into this mossy grave. And I just lay in that grave for days, just grieving everything, being held literally by that great mother feeling of the earth. I would it felt like I was crying, but I wasn't aware of any pain in my heart. And after a while, I thought, well, I must be imagining that I've been crying. And then I realized that my eyes were really crusty from the salt. And I had really been crying, but I was in this sort of delirious state where I didn't know what realm I was in, what was real, where I was, who was holding me. It was just really beautiful. They just held and held and held me and healed me, whoever they are, the spirits of the forest, Great Mother herself, Gaia, whatever. It's really hard to put into words, isn't it? But I felt like I'd sunk down into the earth and they held me.
Wow. So during that time, food, water, it's just water
Water only, yeah, for 4 days.
for 4 days and
Yeah,
being held by Mother Earth herself back to the mother.
yeah,
Yeah, and accepting without all the distractions and the noise, just being so present with yourself. Again, it's that yin energy, it's that deep surrender
mm,
to
yeah.
what has
A deep
happened.
breath.
Yeah, yeah. Just being fully, fully present with all that is, all that ever was. So when we strip away all the distractions, the TV, the Netflix, the books, even, and we just come home, truly home to the hearth of who we are. And I
Yeah.
love how you describe that, just that beautiful merge with nature, just being
Mm.
absolutely at one with nature. What did
Mm.
that do for you, Carol? What were the benefits to that?
It's really hard to put into words because it's not like I received some really startling vision and I knew I had to go back out into life and do this thing. I just feel like, because I'm sure every vision quest is completely different and personal to whatever the needs of that person are. For
Yeah,
me, clearly, all I needed was to properly rest and grieve and be held. That's
yeah,
all I needed. So that's what the forest gave me,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Other people, because I was in a group doing this, and obviously we did a campfire when we all came back and we all processed what had gone on. Other people had very different experiences, and some were incredibly inspired and energized by their experience. But for me, it was all about the softness and the
Beautiful,
surrender, as you say.
beautiful.
So I can't put it into words really what difference that made to me afterwards. But I just trust that it was an initiation of sorts and
Mhm.
that I wouldn't have been able to move forward in my life the way I have if I
Mm.
hadn't done that.
Wow. So let's now come to talking about the divine intelligence of all things, which is really what you're describing in such a beautiful way. And, our waters, we know all these studies that people like Dr. Masaru Emoto, Vida Austin has taken up, oh my goodness, the mantle in such an incredible way to talk about how water holds memory. And of course, our bodily waters, our bloods, are coded with so much beyond what we can even begin to imagine.
Mm.
Science, you talked about metaphysics, we're really catching up with ourselves. The body's already intelligently doing what it's meant to do without us having to understand it. So it's almost like the research is like slowly confirming what is actually going on. So we can't, the mind, the mind is the block, isn't it? The body knows, it's got such wisdom, it just knows what to do when we listen and knows what's most natural in nature to the human condition. So the blood, the womb, that motherly energy, and even though you've not been a what we would describe as a mother, you've not birthed children, but you still have this incredible capacity to be that what I would call the divine emanation of the mother. And you bring what beautiful wisdom that you have retained and learned and initiated within yourself forward into your own work, Carol. And today you are, well, I'll let you explain this in your own words, but you are a fertility expert, a massage therapist, you've been a metaphysical tutor and teacher. You just have these incredible abilities to tune in to other women and to help them tune into themselves and learn at such a deep level what is going on for them. And I would love to hear more from your perspective on really the work that you do. What is your passion and purpose now in of being of service to women?
Okay, well, I think we started here, didn't we? I said that my real passion is to help women deal with abuse and trauma. For me, the fertility is a nice bonus if that's what they're after. But I've always attracted abuse survivors into my practice, even when I was just, a normal massage therapist. And so I doubly so now. And so, they might come to me because they think they're coming for fertility, but we have to get into the real reasons why their body isn't letting them do that yet. And that's always some layer of abuse. And sometimes it isn't even their stuff. It's
Mm.
just that they've inherited a pattern from their mother or their grandmother or even further back that is blocking them on some level. And until they get conscious about that and learn how to work with that, it's sitting in that unconscious. And it's the unconscious is like what 80-90% of human behavior.
Mhm.
It runs the show. It is so much more powerful than any wishful thinking we might be having up here. So, and that's what I love about the womb work. It accesses the subconscious
Mm.
in the best way I've seen through the body that I've ever seen. And I've looked for that my whole life. I was always looking for an integrated body mind bodywork session, especially when the trauma went in when the person was pre-verbal.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
can't expect a talking therapy to help them process something that happened before they learnt language.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, of course, any inherited pattern from the womb is pre-verbal. So this is powerful stuff. So I
yeah.
believe if we can help to clear women's wombs, we can change the world one baby at a time. Because she can then hold a baby, a soul of a higher frequency than she would have done before. And so we are bringing in generation on generation, much higher frequency population. And that's how we heal the world through the womb. I really believe that.
Wow. I love the depth that you go to here. I mean, I've trained like yourself, Carol, in several different healing modalities, and silent counseling for me is one of the main ways that I support clients now, and it's a quantum healing technology. It's a blend of different technologies where we can go back to the root cause, and very often the womb is one of the root causes for trauma and intergenerational trauma and healing that ancestral line. And we spoke earlier in this conversation about the soul contracts that we come in with. It's like we're experiencing lifetimes of adversities and challenges. And I really see that being borne out so much in my client work, where there is so much that people, especially women, are experiencing. And it's because they've signed up for the gig to say, I'm going to clear this for the collective. We're going back to the tribal stuff, the family constellations, but also the ancestors. And it can go way, way back. But it also then heals the future generations as well. And this is why, we're time benders, we're healing in the quantum field. And this is, for me, what is so fascinating about the subconscious mind, because we're going beyond the verbal. Yeah, we're not needing to rely on verbal recollection memory, which, verbal memory, the mind can be so limiting as well. It can be so unreliable. So we're going into this quantum field to heal. And this is the stuff, again, that I've been so late in this life to come back to remember. And it just blows my mind how complex but also simple it is. It's like, gosh, we should be learning this throughout our lives. We should be passing on this, call it what you will, but esoteric wisdom, this just how it should be. It should just be like this, that we should be talking about this in our families. We should be living in this way. We should be teaching this, in whatever educational way, because I do believe education will change. I think that how we know education right now, the institutionalized forms of education will change, and I really welcome those changes. And it needs to come back to living in symbiosis with nature. And we're so far removed from that. So, what would you say? I feel like I'm returning again to one of my previous questions. What needs to change? It's like coming home to nature. So, when a client comes to work with you, Carol, I'm wondering, the question really that I'm coming to is, how much do they already know? Because I'm guessing many of them don't know this. And it's like, how do you even begin to open this up with someone and
Yeah.
explore that for them? It must just completely shatter their world in a lot of ways. Like, oh my goodness, this is completely different to what their lived
Wow.
experience may have been.
Yeah. But if someone's coming to me in private practice for a womb massage, I meet them where they are.
Mm.
I don't hit them with my cosmology. You know, if she turned up in a pink Chanel suit with her, with a briefcase, and she's been working at CEO level her whole life, I'm not expecting her to understand this stuff, right? And I used to feel all the responsibility
Mhm.
that they would try and put on me, like, they were desperate, fix me, I'm desperate to have a baby, you're my last hope, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And I used to feel that pressure on my shoulders. And then the womb taught me that she knows exactly how to heal every woman from the inside out in the perfect way for that woman's speed and journey, right? And all I had to do was trust. All I had to do was do my thing and initiate her womb through the work that I do. And that womb would then start to heal her. And she would come to her own realizations.
Wow. That is such a beautiful lesson right there as well. It's like meeting each person where they're at, which is what I would hope I always try and do. But again, this is a paradigm shift, isn't it? This is like You are the emanation of the Divine Mother, as I describe it, because right now we've got too many sort of patriarchal systems where there's hierarchy, where I'm the font of all knowledge, you're coming to me, I'm the expert here, and I will fix you. Now, we can look at education, we can look at the medical field. There are so many corporate, even we can look at so many systems that are in place on the planet right now, and it's the exact opposite experience of what you've just described. So again, this is like the paradigm shift where the yin energy, the divine feminine, needs to now lead and show the way. And I just think it's so beautiful that you're saying that I'll hold the space and I'll meet you where you're at, but actually your womb, the wisdom of the womb is leading the way here and
Always.
rightly placing, the nature, the wonder of all things as the leader in all of this. Let's explore this journey together and see where it leads. I just think it's such a beautiful way that you honor nature, Carol, and the lessons that it holds, the wisdom that it holds. It's just so, so beautiful. Now, you mentioned, I want to talk to you about grief as well, and I want to talk to you about that womb wisdom. I wonder if there are examples of having worked with clients, and obviously we'll respect client confidentiality here. What sort of transformations or deep, deep lessons have you learned, have you witnessed from working with clients? I'd love for you just to share some real life examples of maybe grief, fertility, like what have you witnessed, been fortunate enough to witness happen?
Well, so it's really hard to, there's just so many on every level, right? You can be in the middle of a session and then somebody suddenly just accesses memories or levels of emotion that they had completely suppressed and forgotten on a conscious level, and it's just pouring out of them. And you just know that that was exactly the release that their body needed. They've been holding that their whole lives. Like, when Neo speaks in the Matrix about like it's like there's a splinter in your brain, there's something wrong, but you
Mhm,
can't remember what it is.
mhm.
We've all got that splinter in our brain. We've all got levels of trauma that we don't even know is there. So how would we even know to ask the questions about unearthing it, right?
Yeah,
It's so deep.
yeah,
And so to see a woman actually just start to release that from the tissues of her body, it's just beautiful. And then rolling on from that, you just get people that just get that aha moment. You see them come back into alignment. They
mhm,
just have that, oh my God, I've just totally got it. You
yeah,
know that they're never going to be the same again. Their body's going to start healing from that point because
yeah,
they're back in alignment, they're back in their truth. And
yeah,
you can see it and you can feel the shift in the room.
yeah,
Um, and then they come back reporting huge shifts in their health. They will text me and say, I've just fallen pregnant and the doctors told me it was impossible. It's just all these things, right? The proof's in the pudding, right?
amazing, absolutely
E-
amazing.
Even if it's just seeing her come back the next month with a light in her eyes, if she walks in 1 month just looking really dead and ill and stressed. And then she comes back just 1 month later and there's a light in her eyes. She's on again. She's in there. You can see her, not the drone she turned into. You
Yeah,
know she's coming to life.
yeah. And that's exactly what I heard before you said the words coming back to life, being reborn. So, and I guess for me, that is really where I knew this would lead. It's like that rebirthing. And again, it's the womb magic. It's like we rebirth ourselves and we don't even realize what's actually going on so many levels until we bring more conscious awareness to it. So we're
Yeah.
bringing really from the subconscious, we're making us conscious of the magic and the power that we hold. And I just think, there can be no greater honour than this kind of work, Carol, so that you
Mm.
are unlocking women's magic that they didn't even know they held. You're bringing them home to themselves and
Yeah.
rebirthing them to the true power that they hold. Now,
Mm.
one of the other things that you just kind of dropped in at the start of the conversation was Tantra and tantric sex. And, for me, sacred sexuality. Now, again, there have been so many untruths and lies told. When I first heard, and I'm talking like just in recent years, women and men mentioning Tantra or tantric sex, I'm like, well, what? Almost like there's like, or a bit of shame or a bit of like, oh, that sounds a bit dodgy. There's been all of these inversions that have
Mm.
run rampant through, mind programming. We'll not go much deeper into that, but what do you mean by Tantra? And for me, it's the sacred teachings. Again, we're never taught this in family constellations or in, schools, educational institutions. And we should be talking much earlier with, not just women, but men too, about the sacredness of sexuality.
Yeah.
So when you dropped in about Tantra, what do you mean by that, Carol?
Well, ancient practices before they got hijacked by the West into just another weekend retreat for sexual gratification. The real practice is, as you say, incredibly sacred. The idea is that, and this I believe was the basis of arranged marriages in India, for instance, that whole culture,
Mhm.
which again, we can look back at and say how controlling and all this kind of stuff, right? But actually, what if it grew out of a desire to make sure that people were only partnered up with somebody that was their equal and that could meet them energetically where they needed to be? If we understand each other as these splinters of God,
Mhm.
and I've chosen a female body this lifetime and I'm seeking my male, and this doesn't have to be heterosexual, of course. You can get single sex couples that are holding Shiva and Shakti one the other, and they still can achieve this process. But um, I need, if I'm going to have a sexual partner, and if he's going to really respect me and the energy, the cosmic womb energy that I'm holding, and the ability I have to initiate him into the presence of God through my own body, then he needs to meet me where I deserve to be met.
Mhm.
So my parents would have done our astrological charts and met with his parents many times and discussed things to make sure that there was an energetic and a personality level compatibility between the two people that they were suggesting get married for life, so that they could come together in an energetic exchange and a learning program that involved learning how to use the sexual energy, not for sexual gratification necessarily, but to create that transmutation up the body, that into that blissful state up through the heart and into the pineal gland. And so the whole thing, again, I really believe one of the main motivations for humanity to develop this mechanism through those many thousands of years that we were in the Kali Yuga and
Mhm.
surviving being that far from the galactic center, if we hadn't have created very clever systems like that, we wouldn't have preserved a high enough level of frequency in the human womb to stop ourselves from never being able to come back up out and into consciousness. We could have descended into far worse states than we did, and it's been bad enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see why there have been, again, agendas, nefarious agendas, bringing in the whole porn side of things. It's a
Yeah.
whole infiltration to
Yeah.
keep people prisoner, if you like, and dull down so that they never discover their true magic within. And we can start to weave in a whole conversation about what orgasm is and orgasmic bliss and um, even the high-risk gamas teachings, that high-risk gamas is like a sacred marriage internally before we seek the partner externally. And there's a lot of even in the New Age movement, a lot of distortions about twin flames and all of that. But again, these can be hour-long conversations in and of themselves, Carol. And I really, really, I'm so, so grateful that I'm learning about all of this. No matter how late, it's never too late for us to learn this because I really do feel that all it is a homecoming to ourselves, that we're remembering. This isn't new learning, this is remembrance from what we hold within us. And as you've said, over and over in this beautiful conversation, the womb holds so much of this wisdom. We have retained this wisdom. And even if, like you or I, have had our physical womb removed, that energetic imprint is still there. It's still absolutely there. We never lose that. So I want to thank you so much for, even though I've never worked with you in this lifetime on a physical and a personal level with a one-to-one consultation, we have connected on so many levels in the astral, and we do work on the behalf of the collective, which just blows my mind. The things that we experience is just because it's all energy, right? It's all energy and it's all healing. It's just so, so very beautiful. But for women that are fortunate enough to have the ability to be able to travel and to work with you in person, I would love for us to finish off with where women can find you, Carol. I know that you've got a website, you do a lot of in-person teaching, and gosh, I wished I lived closer because I would definitely be signing up to come and just be with you, to listen to you, and to remember so much more about this magic that we hold. So please, please, please share with us how women can find you and how they can work with you and how they can learn from you.
Okay, well, my main website is Fertility Massage Melbourne. Don't be fooled by the name. It's a long story why I ended up with that URL. Fertility is not my focus, it's just a nice benefit. So if you go to Fertility Massage Melbourne, you'll see that I do take a few private clients still, but mainly I just teach. So I train other people to do what I do now because I've only got a few years of work left in me. I'm 60 this year and I'm really trying to hand over the baton to other younger women. So I want to train as many other women as I can. So I run these women fertility massage therapy training courses. And I've just written my own advanced womb work course, which includes the breasts as well, which is like just such a joy to be able to include those again into the massage. It's always hurt me that I had to sort of avoid this area, So I'm just overjoyed that that's finally been written and accredited, and we can start getting some really seriously powerful and enjoyable body work out to women that need it.
Amazing. Well, as Dr. Christiane Northrup, who we're all fans of, in her book, The Goddess Never Ages, you do not look anything like you're going to be 60 this year. You look 20 years at least younger than what you are, Carol. But you carry the wisdom of not just a near 60-year-old woman, but you carry the goddess. I'm going to say it again, the divine mother wisdom. You've come in with some pretty special codes that you are sharing with me, you're sharing with the audience that tune into this, and all these incredible souls that have come into your world and have learned so much more than just, when we hear like fertility massage, womb and fertility massage, there's so many layers to that. There's so much depth to that, as you've rightly said. And what an incredible, incredible journey that you've experienced. I know we've not even heard half of what your lived experience has. I know more than what you've shared in here. And it's just like, oh my goodness. And I just want to thank you, Carol. I'm so grateful that you've come into my life. I'm so grateful that you've come on to the show today to share um, such beautiful, beautiful wisdom that you have shared today. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, and I'm sure the listeners and viewers could listen to you for hours and hours and hours. And I know right now that you're considering putting some of your teachings online as well so that you have a further reach. And I really hope that you do. I really, really hope that you do. No pressure, but I think it's so special what you offer. I know that I said I wanted to finish on that, but it would be really remiss of me not to mention the liquid crystals and trees because, and you also work with astrology, and we've not even touched on astrology. You've mentioned cosmology a few times, but you're also an astrologer, and oh my goodness, there's just so much to the wisdom. There's so much depth to what you bring forward, Carol. And you told me before today's call that this is Moldavite Day. So I've got my Moldavite on here today, which I have to say has challenged me to actually host this podcast episode because I've wanted to go really into places. And I'm like trying to keep my mind focused on the conversation at the same time. So
Yeah.
could we please just finish with a little bit of what are the liquid crystals and the
Mm.
trees that you refer to? And yeah, what is that all about, and why is that an important aspect of how you live your life and how you bring it into your work?
Okay, well, it's another cycle. It's another ancient cycle that other cultures would have worked with, probably definitely all the way back to Atlantis, and I'm sure the Maya had a version of it. So that Gaia goes through these a cycle of frequencies about 5 times a year, cycles through the same 72 crystals, and then once a year, when you approaching that day out of time, I think 25th of July, you get these next dimension crystals for 5 days, which then um, makes all the numbers work. So there's like this really special portal that opens, culminating in that day at a time. And so if you know what those cycles are, you can then understand the frequency that the earth is in that day and you can work with it. And it's just another way to have yourself synced with nature, just as, astrology is seeking to do, sync us with the heavens as above, so below. So I just love to know what it is, what the crystal is each day. And today is Moldavite Day. And Moldavite is the quintessential starseed crystal. So no wonder you've been having trouble keeping it grounded. But I was really excited that it turned out to be this day because then I knew it would be very easy to get into the metaphysics because that's where she likes to go. Um, so this was all developed by a guy called Justin Asar, and he's from Vanuatu and lives in Australia. So I would never have heard of him or met him if I hadn't moved here. And I'm sure he was one of the reasons why I ended up here. So what he does is it's not like an elixir. It's some people I've seen they make things from gems and they're kind of almost like a homeopathic
Mhm.
dose. They'll actually get the actual gem and make an elixir. This isn't that at all. What Justin works on a really seriously high level, and he actually talks to the nature spirits, the devas of each crystal or tree. He negotiates with the master diva of that crystal group whether they agree for this is what he had to do when he was developing the 72 that went in the cycle. And then basically they've agreed for a part of their consciousness to become encapsulated in this liquid stock form, which I can then make up into treatment bottle dilutions. So when somebody is putting this in their body, they're not putting a bit of pearl or a bit of emerald in. They're putting the consciousness of the diva that creates, manifests that pearl, that
Wow.
emerald within the structure of the earth. So it is really high level stuff.
Wow. And again, we could have a whole hour conversation or more about that.
Sure could, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I have been on that website a few years ago. I'd heard of the liquid crystals and had forgotten all about it until you mentioned that you work with it. So this is something then that you work with. Do you, I don't know if prescribe's the right word, but do you provide these remedies for people as well then?
Yeah. So
Oh,
I did all these training courses before it all got shut down during the lockdowns in Melbourne.
right.
And so I've got all the stock sets here. And if I'm sure that you need Moldavite drops, I can just make your drops for however long I think you need to take it.
Wow.
Usually for a lunar month, but sometimes you need longer programs and things because it depends what you're taking them for.
Mhm,
Because these things can work on a very physical level when needed.
mhm,
Say,
mhm,
like diamond, for instance, is what you would prescribe somebody if they were dealing with active cancer in the body.
mhm, mhm,
Because that literally draws all the light to itself. So it literally takes the cells out of the energy of the tumor.
mhm,
So that's why we'd prescribe diamond for that. And there's so many physical, emotional, and mental and spiritual levels why you might give somebody something. They might be looking to unlock their Atlantean memories. And so if you could key into the right, because it's all based on the tree of life,
mhm.
Kabbalistic tree of life. So each of those spheres of consciousness is represented by a different set of crystals. So you can work your way around the tree of life using the crystals as entry and exit crystals to get you into the next place and then out again to the next. So there's like a series of tests that the crystals put you through to see if your consciousness is ready to move on. So you can do really high level work.
Wow. And again, with nature, work
Yes.
with these incredible nature spirits, the essence of them that are creating these crystalline and matter. Um, I was going to say substances, but crystals, yeah, crystalline structures that we work with. How
Yeah.
amazing. Oh my goodness. Wow, I'm so glad that I asked that question at the end, Carol. I've got goosebumps and I'm definitely going to be speaking to you a bit more about those because I'm really, really interested in this for me personally. Um, Thank you so much for coming on today, Carol. It's just been the most beautiful conversation, and what a treat. Those of you that are tuning into this conversation, I know that you will agree. What a treat just being in your presence and listening to these deep, deep wisdom sharings that you've so generously shared today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll drop below this episode Carol's website, and you can check her out for yourself. And if you're lucky enough to live close enough to Carol, then you are really in for some profound, profound life shifts. Oh, blessings to you, Carol, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. Don't forget to like and share and subscribe, please. It would be wonderful if you did. Big love.